Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you for this, the sixth dialogue on research and ethics during the pandemic, challenges and lessons to learn in Latin America and the Caribbean. In this sixth session of our dialogue, we will be discussing what we have learned so far. Before continuing, I would like to make sure that any colleagues who wish to listen to this session in English have the information that they need. You can find it in the chat in order to access the interpretation. And I will say this in English now. Ethan. All right, very well. So, as I was saying, this is our last session of the dialogue, and I would like to start by thanking everyone who has been involved in this effort by PAHO making it possible. I have not mentioned this or I have not mentioned that financing from the German government has made this dialogue sessions possible. I have also not mentioned that funding from Wellcome Trust has also allowed us to develop the guidance documents from the Pan American Health Organization during the COVID pandemic. So we want to look at this regional situation. We want to make sure that what some people learn benefits other people as well, and that this may be available in time to implement or adjust some of our measures to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, we are all learning about what worked and what worked better together and what we can do differently. Thank you for accompanying us at this last session of the dialogue. If you have not been with us before or have not done so before, please sign up for the PAHO Ethics mailing list. This is where we will share with you the recordings of this and previous sessions, as well as other resources related to research ethics, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, but for other contexts as well. We also thank the interpreters that make it possible for us to bring the English-speaking Caribbean together with the Spanish speakers of Latin America, and they have supported all of our sessions making this possible. I also want to thank Silvina Alcosta, Marcy Neal, Max Serrano, and all of the other colleagues in PAHO's IT department. During this last session of the dialogue, we want to kick off thinking about something that we have learned in our previous discussions. We have identified some of the strengths of our region in its response to COVID-19. We have noticed that there has been a very rapid response by the health authorities. Most countries and within their local jurisdictions and even in research ethics committees, they very quickly established specific strategies to expedite ethics reviews of research related to the pandemic. We have seen also as part of our regional strengths that there is a high level of commitment to catalyze ethical research and to promote public health. And we see this from the members of the ethics committees throughout the region. They have truly been the engines behind this effort to work at a rapid pace while maintaining rigorous ethical standards, even in the context of the pandemic. They have demonstrated a tremendous capacity to adapt to the challenges posed by COVID-19 and have adjusted their processes, demonstrating great resilience. And we would like to congratulate you very sincerely for this accomplishment. We know that this wasn't just done at this one moment in time, but rather this is something we've been working on for a long period of time. We also see that our region has developed a lot of COVID-19 research studies, and we do see that there is a large number of local and academic initiatives that are not just coming from industry. And a high percentage of the studies being carried out in our region have been financed or funded locally. Very soon, a publication will be available with an analysis of the clinical trials done in Latin America, which we have referred to on previous occasions. One last strength that we wish to highlight is the solidarity that has been demonstrated amongst the various stakeholders in ethical research. They are part of the research ethics system. This has been reflected in the high level of collaboration and close communication amongst various researchers, ethics committees, and the health authorities. We have also seen that new mechanisms for fluid communications and continuous communication amongst these various actors have been established. And these are among some people that were not in communication previously. We have also seen that there are some weaknesses within our region. We have seen that while we took a major step forward initially, we did not necessarily think about the sustainability of these strategies. Now we are seeing that it is hard to keep these efforts up during such a long pandemic. We see that most of the ethics committees are overwhelmed with work, and they do not always have the material or human resources that they need to continue to work at the pace that has been imposed by the pandemic. Many people are exhausted, and the research continues apace during the pandemic. We have also seen another weakness in terms of the lack of coordination between research efforts. We have seen that often research is taking place within the same jurisdiction and sometimes even within the same institution. However, there is not always enough coordination between these different research efforts and the authorities making decisions. This means that the results of the research are not necessarily being used for decision making. So we need to clearly establish a research policy that prioritizes making use of this research and coordinates research efforts within these institutions and with the decision-making authorities during the pandemic. Finally, we also see a weakness in terms of having timely supervision of research studies underway. Since this is a pandemic, it's not just our country or institution that is conducting the research on COVID-19, but rather the whole world is doing this. This means that supervision of studies underway is complicated because what was approved today may not be ethically acceptable tomorrow or a week from now. And this is why we also put out specific guidance on that topic. Generally speaking, and to summarize all of this, I believe that we have learned that in terms of research ethics and our various roles within the national system for research ethics, that we can work differently and we can work better. I think that the changes forced on us by the pandemic gave us an opportunity to innovate, which will go beyond the emergency situation. For this reason, I am now going to share a slide with you. I want to show you the questions, or some of the questions, that we should be asking ourselves even beyond this session. What should we be doing differently always in all cases, not just in an emergency situation? And what measures should we take to address our weaknesses within our jurisdictions? What could or should we have done differently? And how can we improve our ethics preparedness for future emergencies? Many of these questions are going to be explored during this dialogue, but I would like to invite all participants to go to the PAHO Bioethics address. Please email that address with your answers to these questions. So if you have had a relevant experience or a case that we have not discussed in these dialogue sessions, please feel free to share them with us. And before I introduce our panelists for today's dialogue, I wish to reiterate PAHO's commitment to put out a publication after the pandemic that will not only consolidate the guidances that we are publishing on research ethics within the context of the pandemic, but it will also include the lessons that we have learned and any other adjustments we have found necessary in light of what we are learning regionally over the course of this pandemic. So for this dialogue, I wish to present our today's panelists. From Argentina, we have Adriel Roitman. He is part of the Central Research Ethics Committee of the Ministry of Health of the city of Buenos Aires. We also have as a panelist during today's session, Sandra Tapia, who is the chair of the ad hoc scientific ethics research for research on COVID-19 vaccines in Chile. We also have Juan Villacorta with us. He is from the Temporary Research Ethics Committee for the COVID-19 emergency in Peru. And from the English-speaking Caribbean, I'm sorry, I forgot to say that Juan is with us from Peru and Sandra is from Chile. We also have Cheryl Cox Macpherson with us, who is based in Grenada, and she leads the program CREEi, which is for training and research ethics for the Caribbean, and is a member of the Bioethics Association of the English-speaking Caribbean. Thank you all for being with us today. I invite you to turn on your cameras once again. And we have Ana Palmero and Sarah Caracedo with us today as moderators. You should be familiar with them. They are consultants of the PAHO Bioethics program. Anna also works under the Research Bureau of the Ministry of Health of the National Bureau of Argentina, and she's going to be the general moderator of this session. Sarah Caracedo also works at the National Health Institute of Peru. She will be moderating the Q&A session. Before I give the floor to Anna and thank our panelists again for being here today, I would like to invite you to write your questions in the Q&A session, questions and answers. Please post them there. If you have any comments or links you would like to share, please do that through the chat function. So as soon as I give the floor to Anna, I am going to give you the bioethics program's email address once again, and the links to our relevant publications, as well as the link to signing up to for our email list. Thank you all for being here today.
Gracias, Carla.
Thank
Buenas
you,
tardes
Carla, and
a
good
todos los
afternoon
panelistas.
to
Muchas gracias por
all of
estar
the
aquí con
panelists.
nosotros
Thank
en
you for
esta
being here
última
with us
sesión.
today during
Y
this
bueno,
last session.
como venía presentando Carla,
As Carla
en
was
todas
telling
estas
you,
sesiones hemos
throughout all of these
podido
sessions,
identificar
we
aquellas
have been able to
debilidades y también
identify
fortalezas que
the
encontramos
strengths and
en todas estas
weaknesses that
estrategias
we
que
have
tuvimos
found through the
que
various
adaptar
strategies that
rápidamente, ¿no?
we have
En este
had to
contexto tan
rapidly
novedoso y de tanta
adapt
incertidumbre
to this
como
very
lo es la
new and
pandemia
uncertain
de
situation
COVID-19.
posed by the
Y en ese
COVID-19
sentido, una de
pandemic.
las debilidades
In
que
this
fue
regard, one of the
identificada y
weaknesses
marcada
that
recurrentemente en
we
las sesiones anteriores
identified
tiene que
in a
ver
significant
con
way and
el
repeated
desafío
previous
que
sessions
existe
of
en
the
la
dialogue
región
is the challenge
con
that
respecto a
exists
la
in the
falta
region
o una sensación o una
vis-a-vis
realidad de
a rather
falta de
a
apoyo
feeling
institucional
or
para el
actual lack
funcionamiento
of
de los
institutional
comités
support for
de
the
ética
operation
en
of the
investigación,
research
sobre todo
ethics
teniendo en cuenta
committees,
que durante la
particularly
pandemia
bearing in mind that
su
during the
trabajo se ha
pandemic,
visto
the work
sobrecargado
of
por la
these
cantidad de
committees
estudios que
has
empezaron
exploded
a
because of the number of
aparecer en los
studies that
países
are being
de nuestra
presented to
región.
them
Y con
in
respecto a
the
esto, queríamos
countries of our region.
preguntarles
In
qué
this regard,
estrategias
I would like
sugieren
to ask
ustedes
all of
para
you
superar
what
estas
strategy you
debilidades en el
suggest for
corto plazo,
overcoming
pensando
these
ahora
weaknesses
en lo que nos
in
va
the
a restar
short
de la
term,
pandemia, que esperemos que sea poco,
looking
y también
at what is
pensándolo
left of the
para el
pandemic, which
largo
we hope is
plazo.
not that much, and also what you
Adriel,
think we
¿querés
should change
comenzar?
for the long term. Adriel, would you like to start? Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I wish to thank you for the invitation, and it truly is a pleasure to participate in this dialogue. As for the question you've asked, I think that what the pandemic has done is to highlight some specific things, and that is the committees. It seems hard to believe, but every time we have meetings like this or we get together, those of us who sit on these committees are like in a self-help group. We're trying to figure out things, how we can do things and how we can make a greater effort. I think that the pandemic makes even more visible the longstanding shortcomings of these committees. The pandemic is a new scenario in which we have much higher visibility, and perhaps our activity becomes more important. Generally speaking, research is always in the second or third place in health centers. But the new scenario has shown new possibilities with new strategies. We're trying to get enough the resources we need, this financial and human resources, spaces that work well. But perhaps what the pandemic is forcing us to do is to what we need to think out about what we need to ask for. We have seen over this time that we all contribute a lot. The committees have made a tremendous effort, and the researchers and health authorities as well. But maybe these have not been well enough coordinated. So I think it's very important to think of areas of research for different centers or different health systems. I think that improvements in research areas would necessarily bring in some changes to the research ethics committee. So we need to generate interest for better decision making at health institutions and centers. So research activity brings about a lot of scientific, academic, and even economic advantages. I think we should translate these improvements into ways to get more resources for the research ethics committees.
Gracias, Adriel.
Thank you, Adriel. Sandra. Hello and good afternoon. I thank you very much for this invitation to be able to speak with all of you during this dialogue. In terms of strategies to overcome the weaknesses that we heard about, in terms of lessons learned, we need to keep and strengthening the operation of the committees through networks. I think that the sum of the experiences of everyone involved in these research ethics committees should generate synergies, and there's tremendous human capital here. When you don't have enough resources, This has an impact on the results and the deliberations and solutions that may be found in terms of how I think it's better if we operated in networks with our research ethics committees, but it has to be a real network. It should be for consultation on very specific things in terms of lessons learned. I think that we need to empower this networking. We need to have a real dynamic network, and this should be here to stay, not just during the pandemic. So that's what I think we need for the future. It doesn't cost money to have a network, but we need to make sure that we coordinate people. This also means that we have to change the logic of our work in order to have a system that is based on cooperation. I also think that the tremendous value of cooperation is also a change that's here to stay. We need to make sure that our work can be more efficient in this way, more expeditious, and we need to share our knowledge with other countries. Generally speaking, this improves training for the members of the committees, but when these you also have to have self-training. And I think that there are poor countries that may have tremendous potential in this regard. Also, within the research ethics committees, I also see a convening of experts. It has been demonstrated during the pandemic that the scientific ethics committees need people with the expertise on specific topics. We've seen this with COVID-19. You might be a virologist or some kind of specialist should be involved who could really add to the work of these research ethics committees. So I think that nowadays, we're also looking at telematic elements. We never thought we'd be working this way, but this is something else that is here to stay. So the lack of access to well, we always had a problem in which we didn't have access to these experts, but now that everything is done virtually, don't worry, we don't have the expenses of bringing somebody in physically. So if you look at a country such as Chile, a long, skinny country in which our ethics committees are also very far apart and also have differences in terms of their membership and access to experts. But now online platforms have posed tremendous opportunities. So it's much cheaper to get the participation of these experts, and this is something that I think we need to keep. I also believe that in terms of the Central Committee's recommendations, guidelines, standards for research ethics review is very important. We need to continue this not only during the pandemic. During the pandemic, it became apparent that all of these recommendations, for example, in the case of Chile, the recommendations that came from our Research and Ethics and Scientific Research Committee, we didn't have clear rules. But we really should have anticipated how research ethics would be affected during an emergency, during a health emergency. So it is also very important to move forward with good operating procedures during an emergency. Some countries have already been reviewing this before the pandemic. But for those who had not, this is a lesson learned. It is also very important to look at the issue of having standard operating procedures during normal and emergency situations in order to have online operation. And we need to look at the operation of our committees, such as the value of remote signing of minutes and documents. So we should have regulations that support this different way of working. And a different way means that despite the fact that it may be at a very accelerated pace, we can continue to have scientific rigor. So all of this is part of this different way of working. That's part of what the pandemic has taught us. And over the long term, we need to look at the functioning of the National Ethics Committee. It's not really regulated by law, but it's been operating. So I think that we also have to put something together in terms of the National Scientific Ethics Committee, and they need to review these ethics protocols when there's a bigger social impact, such as things related to vaccines and research on COVID-19. And also, we need to coordinate the ad hoc scientific ethics research committees in order to create some level of specialization amongst these different committees. And other criteria in terms of who should be involved. If we have no criterion for review, then there tends to be unequal protection of the participants. That's also very relevant, and we need to be aware of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting one. We have heard several of your colleagues and authorities from Peru in prior sessions, and they have certainly underscored the overload of research they've received, taking into account the strategy they adopted of having a single committee to review clinical trials on COVID. So what do you think in terms of strategies for the short term for that committee, and also for the long term? What solutions, what strategies would be necessary? Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting us. Yes, for me, uh, an important issue is the fact that the committee's work becomes visible. The problem of research, especially in the health area, is that it's not perceived as important for those who are responsible for the health sector management. Those who are at that level are concerned about management, and in the case of COVID, when is the vaccine coming, etc. But what lies behind all of that is all the research that leads to solutions to the problem. And there is lack of visibility and understanding of that. In our case, the Ministry of Health has set up a central research committee, and there has been good communication with the health system. There are different levels beyond the ministry that are the ones allotting resources and in charge of regulations, and they may facilitate the work of the committee. And in that sense, I think that making the work of the committee visible at those level by those agencies who must understand the importance of the work done by the committee is something needed in order to resolve, or at least better manage, the problems that have emerged during the pandemic. This making the committee visible should include a clear explanation of the benefits of the work carried out at committee level and the changes that have led to accelerating processes, and this would lead it to obtain resources for the work too. And I think that's one of the issues. The first thing, to have adequate collaboration and support of the work of the committee. If we have researchers perceived as important by the authorities, then that would be good. So it is necessary again to make the research work and the researchers visible, and communication would be key to this. There should be communication between the committee and other levels or agencies of government so that the work carried out by the committee can be supported and for research to continue. And so this is what I have to say for now. Thank you very much, Juan. Cheryl, would you like to please tell us briefly about the situation in Grenada with respect to the evaluation and review of COVID studies and also research related to the pandemic, and what strategies, and I would like to know if you have had other similar problems with the overload of research and work in the ethics fields, and what strategies you see possible both in the short term and in the long term.
Thank you, Anna. So just to quickly introduce myself further, I'm a professor at St. George's University here in Grenada and also a senior research fellow at WINDREF, the Windward Islands Research and Education Foundation. And the research ethics training CREEi that Carla mentioned early on is actually funded by the Fogarty Center in the NIH in the United States. And it's providing a 2-year master's degree program in research ethics to citizens and residents of English-speaking and Spanish-speaking countries in the Caribbean basin. So we're really trying to reach those in Latin America rather than South America. And we have we actually have 11 from, at the moment, Mexico and Honduras, who are enrolled in the program, in the Spanish-speaking program. My own Spanish is extremely limited, but I am working on that. So to answer the question, Grenada is a very, very small country. We have about 100,000 people. So the COVID studies that are coming to our Research Ethics Committee are primarily behavioral and social sciences type. We don't have enough population to make the various clinical trials and things useful to the big groups that are doing multi-site trials. However, I do want to speak to the question, the strategies that you've all been discussing. One of the things I like to think of things a little bit kind of going upstream, as we might say. And so this question of resources is very, very real, and it's a serious problem for us, even in Grenada, where we have a very limited number of people who have the time or energy or motivation to do research ethics committee work. It's a very serious thing, and I fully agree with the comments made at the outset and what I've heard on when I've sat in on some of the other discussions, that we do have very committed people around the region. And so my take on this is that what we often forget is that the stakeholders in the whole research and research ethics enterprise are so much greater than just the researchers. And it's to do with the institutions, the decision makers, the policy makers, the administrators at all levels of administration, the health authorities, all of them somehow, and I think this echoes what Juan was saying earlier, somehow we need to work to bring them up to speed in recognizing the value of what research ethics brings to their countries, their institutions, their health systems, and their people. Once we have that in place, then I think there's going to be a greater effect, not just financially, but so at academic institutions in the English-speaking Caribbean and also in North America, we talk about FTE, full-time equivalent, and I don't know how that translates if you have something similar in your institutions, but our research ethics committee members are mostly employed at the university, and they get little to no official recognition for their work. They're, you know, and if we were to give them, say, 5% or whatever the percentage might be, doesn't really matter, but to officially recognize that as essential work, I think that would help a great deal in terms of our resources, because everyone's talked in the past about the burnout and the lack of time and energy. I know myself, it's been a real challenge to make time, and there are some that I've not made time for. So yeah, that for me is really important. I'm not sure how we go about that, but the strategy from my perspective is to raise awareness among all the stakeholders beyond the researchers, finding ways to educate them in the appropriate ways so that they will value what we're doing and take more action. And if I could add one last thought, Sandra I think your first comment was about a network, a real dynamic network for research ethics. And in the English-speaking Caribbean, there was a very, very good attempt coming out of CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Association, I believe that stands for, if you're not familiar with it. But somehow that, at least that was going to be for the English-speaking Caribbean. And I think it had some success, but it kind of dwindled, and I'm not sure, I don't know the ins and outs of that. I wasn't part of it, but it's not terribly active or present or visible. And the grant CREEi is one of the outputs is intended to be a vibrant, dynamic research ethics network, at least through the Caribbean and Latin American region. So I think Sandra and others who are interested in that, it's definitely something we should talk about in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing the experience of the network of the Caribbean. And certainly this is something we could follow in their example in the region. And one of the strengths we emphasize is the ability of the research ethics committees and its members. Despite the fact that we lack time and resources, we've been able to adapt to the work and to be able to work more quickly and being very rigorous as always. How do you see the work of the committees in the future? Do you think that these processes that are more agile, more streamlined will be maintained, and will we be able to maintain them? And also the changes and adaptations we've seen with respect to the process of informed consent. What do you think about this? Adriel, could you begin? Well, from the outset, I think we have enough competencies to maintain this fluidity that we now have. We have had to acquire these skills because we had to adapt according to what was going on with the pandemic. And I think this is here to stay. There have been mechanisms that make this streamlining possible without incurring an extra cost, etc. The fact is that we need to organize what we already have. I think a little bit of effort will take us far. I don't know, of course, if the level of intensity will be the same because it is exhausting. But I think finding that new way of working will be a good thing to take with us for the future. Also, networks, I completely agree, are essential in Buenos Aires, which is such a big city. Traditionally, committees didn't have contact among each other, but during the pandemic, there has been an exchange developed among committees, especially when there is a large trial going on. I would say the initial germ, the initial idea or seed is there, and we can make it grow. So those who have had more experience and know more about review and evaluation will be able to train those who are newer and are coming next. And I think this type of mentorship will be important, and there will be synergy among the different committees. And this is the beginning of a network. Perhaps we will need more work in the future, but I think this is a seed regarding informed consent. I think we have been awakened, and it has created the need to reflect. We should have been reflecting on this and we hadn't done it. There are certain things regarding informed consent. Culturally, it is something that is taboo. I mean, not only by those who uh, intervene, but also the health authorities. We haven't even be able to discuss the issue of informed consent by proxy or by representation if a person is not able to give his or her own consent. And also, how do we implement the process of informed consent? We need to think of the process in a different way without it being an alternative, but being an integral part of the process. I, we need to have all these discussions regarding the informed consent by representation and other issues, but this is essential. We need to begin discussing these things, and this is a timely moment to start doing so. Thank you very much, Adriel. Juan, oh, what do you think, or how do you see the future regarding the work of committees and also related to informed consent? Do you think, or how do you see these strategies into the future? The committees have been able to adapt themselves to the new situations. But my question is, yes, we have adapted to the urgency of reviews, but we still have kept the rigorousness of the work and the process. But we are vis-a-vis a scenario where we have exhausted human resources that are tired, fatigued, that are not enough. We lack human resources, and we have extreme circumstances for the members of the committee. So on the one hand, we see the urgency, but regarding monitoring, we are not well adapted to the new situation. If we work with centralized committees, it is likely that the work will be on the side of the researchers. And in our case, for example, we have a centralized committee. The the burden is more on the committee than on the researchers. The committee then absorbs the burden. They implement the studies, and monitoring is needed. Some changes and amendments are made. But there comes a point in time where the ability to uh, adapt to the situation then becomes very burdensome. And this is something we need to take into account for the future. If we continue to have the same working conditions, we need to change some of those working conditions so that we can still maintain the same rigorous approach from beginning to end. Uh, Now, regarding our situation in the pandemics, there have been some processes that have been postponed. The committees are focused on evaluating clinical trials and other matters related to COVID, and the obligations of the committees regarding other activities have been postponed. And when the pandemic is over, how will be the burden of work? I think we have a great deal, a great many questions that we need to consider for the future regarding the procedures for informed consent. We need to appraise them and see what the impact is. It, it is obvious that the speed to implement studies is something, but regarding the forms for informed consent and the new forms, I think we are trying to ensure a procedure for informed consent that is adequate and correct as it should be. And now with COVID-19, that's one thing. When we have had informed consents with many pages, but if I am reading and reading, by the fourth page I am exhausted. I don't want to read anymore. And me as an expert, I understand what I'm reading, but for a patient who's hospitalized, who's very sick, and they have to go through all these pages, and maybe they are in poor conditions, maybe having a third person, a representative, an agent would be helpful. And these are new modalities of informed consent that we need to discuss and have a conversation. We need to evaluate this. And this will be a very interesting line of work for researchers in social sciences to see how those people involved in the process are truly keeping to due process, and how is the awareness of those who need to give an informed consent. Another issue that needs to be borne in mind here is how can we separate the concept between a researcher and a treating physician. Sometimes the treating physicians are uh, considered researchers. So this situation needs to be evaluated and truly make a distinction and know who's who. I think we have had a good capacity to become adapted to the situation, and we have been able to improve. However, we have our limits. We have a capacity for adapting, but up to a certain point, and it does not depend on the committee alone, but on other conditions such as the resources given, the support from the administration to the managers, and the kind of support given to the committees, and the way in which the system is set up. So I think that there are some things that are going to remain, but I think we need to continue to evaluate what we're doing. And those things that we are doing well are well, but we need to evaluate and make sure that everything truly is good, and that we continue to do it well. Thank you, Juan. Yes, we have been working all this time in a state of emergency. It is not the normal by any means, and it's not optimal to continue into this emergency crisis mode for the duration. So we need to think all together with other actors. Now, to you, Cheryl, I wanted to ask you whether in Grenada you have adopted accelerated evaluation procedures, or have you adapted some of the systems to analyze and review informed consent procedures? And do you think some of the things that you have adapted now will stay for the future?
Yes. So we have tried to find ways to expedite, to innovate ways to expedite, because we had an expedited process that worked, but could still be slow. And so we're doing fewer reviewers per review, and we're, except for some that really need a full board review. And we're doing a lot more electronically than we were. I think we're a lot more communicative in terms of our Research Ethics Committee. So we have made some changes, but I think and I do think they will persist because they improve our efficiency and our ability to do our job. We're always looking for new members because it's a very burdensome task, and very few of us, as I mentioned, doing it. I mean, we do have about a dozen of us, but very few of them really contribute routinely, I guess would be the way to put it. So I think that, moving forward, we will continue, but I think we'll continue to look for ways to streamline what we do. The concern for us and for, I think, everyone is to not streamline to the point of, being too lax or too careless or too casual about it. That is a concern that I have. And with respect to consent, I absolutely agree that even without COVID, the consent process is a challenge everywhere for anything. That, excuse me, the distinction between the treating physician and the researcher, when they're the same person or when they're not. What we're seeing specific to COVID with things like vaccines or new medications, I mean, it's really interesting globally, is in that, it is all a big experiment. That's with the whole emergency use authorization. In a sense, it's really all research. So I think we do need to really work on consent as a global issue as well as a regional issue, and improving it for pandemics, for COVID, but also just across the board, make it more user-friendly. And one of the challenges with that is that a lot of the studies are funded by corporate interests or commercial interests, and they just want a legal document, and that contributes to the length. So that's a concern. And, it takes a certain type of expertise and patience to pare it down to layperson language. What are the salient issues? And we don't value that enough, I think, in the institutions. That, why hire a PhD level person to do that sort of work when you can get someone with a bachelor's degree or less to do it? But the quality of what you're putting out is very, very different. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Sandra, you said that in Chile, you don't have the standards yet, but we know that committees have adopted accelerated procedures for review. Do you think this could be done for all the country's committees, that this could have some sort of standardization for not only the pandemic, for future health emergencies? Do you think these procedures could remain? Yes. I think that in Chile, we have many more cell phones than people. The access to internet is a situation that has become massive, and that's why I emphasize the importance of IT. I think IT issues need to be em- enabled and empowered. We need to facilitate new ways in which we can do a more accelerated review. I personally think that IT, uh, information technology, generate a more orderly operation of the information we receive through different means, and the IT being used now for the committees gives me an idea that it is a tool that has low economic impact, but that can become significant support in accelerating reviews. And the acceleration of the review should not be opposite of rigorousness. So using these tools, yes, to accelerate reviews, but to improve it, to improve revisions in terms of quality, as I said before, because we can have access to having an expert, a guest, and to be articulated and in network with other committees. So it can help us, it can accelerate reviews, but also the quality of the reviews. In the past, each committee would review their own thing and they maybe acted perhaps too independently. And it is like administration of poverty. So we need to act in coordination and to be articulated and collaborate. And the other thing that I think is that we should empower the research ethics committees, which are uh, agencies that protect human rights. And as such, I think in our countries, our committees should be empowered to play a role that is very, very important socially. We've seen that research, deep down, yes, can save lives. Research in health is the formula to save lives, but this research requires analysis that is ethical and scientific, and um, cautions and protections of the people are essential. And that's why our agencies, our administrations need to understand the importance of our research ethics committees that used to be hidden, and our work was not known by people. But now, thanks to work through networks, etc., we hope that these committees will become agencies that have influence on resources, on the ways in which things are done. So I think that a committee such as ours should have many protections, and sometimes those functions are being carried out by people out of the goodness of their hearts. They are volunteers, but they are not recognized either officially or otherwise. It has been clear that now it has become clear how important research ethics committees are. And so the international agencies should also um, come out and talk about the fact that research ethics committees defend human rights, and therefore action should be generated to protect, to empower these research ethics committees.
Thank you, Sandra. And I just like to highlight the importance of taking advantage of this moment. For the first time, we've appeared in the media and people are asking us about our work. What is a research ethics committee? And they've realized that our work is so important to protect the participants. Now we'll go on to the next question. This is related to the rapid changes we've seen in terms of scientific evidence on COVID-19. And this has highlighted the importance of having reviews and supervision of studies underway to make sure that they continue to be ethical throughout the course of the research. Many people have also expressed the problems we found as countries in the region in order to have continuous and adequate supervision in light of the changing evidence. And also during a previous session with the researchers, they talked about how difficult it is for them to keep up to date with all of the evidence that is being produced so quickly around the world. So what mechanisms do you suggest for coordinating all of this? In order to have proper supervision, it's not only the committee's responsibility, but it's also the investigators, the researchers' primary responsibility to be up on new evidence. So what do you see as potential solutions to create synergies between these responsibilities? And also we know the Research Ethics Committee has a role, and as do the health authorities. Juan, would you like to start off? Well, the situation is really rather complicated. And this makes it very difficult to have proper supervision. But I do believe that it's all a matter of communications mechanisms. That is, communication between the research ethics committees and the researchers, those who are in charge of the studies. In these cases, I think that you can take advantage of technology. Unfortunately, his microphone went off. You can have remote monitoring, and this should be used. You might require some documentation for this, but it is necessary to have in-person verification, so the health authority or the Ministry of Health could provide support in this regard. But since we have rather standardized criteria of how to conduct these reviews to monitor a research study, I think that the ministry could do this under the leadership or supervision of an ethics committee. That would be one mechanism. What I would like to point out is how important communication is. You have to have communication in order to be able to coordinate. And this, without communication, you can't make much progress. Adriel, would you like to add something in terms of suggestions for supervision and how to coordinate amongst the various parties that are responsible, both the committees, the researchers, and the health authorities? Answer, well, I think there are two paths. You need to have supervision of research that is underway through the various centers. In-person mechanisms have reverted more to remote. For example, in the city of Buenos Aires, we have a central committee that does not assess protocols, but rather assesses the performance of the committees, and the committees supervise the studies. And we've also automated some of these processes. We have online registration of health research. So we're looking at these mechanisms to see what is getting approved, and we have information more in real time. And I understand that the automation of these processes makes it easier for the committees to do supervision. It doesn't require as much work in person. Then we have the other problem, which is that it depends on the level of evidence for the study. And this is all so dynamic, and we ourselves have witnessed this. We see how the criterion also vary extensively. And the committee might be approving a study, is evaluating and approving a study, and then so much evidence comes in that it no longer is ethical. So it's very hard to be up to date on all of this in real time. So I think we need to think of a way to generate knowledge through repositories like some kind of a wiki like Wikipedia with somebody monitoring it. But I do think that the exponential growth in this, well, I don't know if you have all the precision of publication, but the fact is that we need to find a way that everyone can share information with enough economic resources. A private center can hire someone who has access to all the publications, and they will spend every day, every week saying this, okay, hydrochloroquine, we said no, plasma, we said no. But not everyone has the media, not even appropriate human resources and access to publications to look at this on a weekly basis. So I do think that we need some kind of repository. We have to have consolidated and pooled efforts so that everyone can have access to this. And so we have to look at what we're trying out. Thank you, Adriel. That's a very good idea to have a general repository, maybe available globally, not just for our region. Cheryl, what has the situation been in the Caribbean vis-a-vis supervision of research studies, given the rapidly changing evidence, and also what mechanisms have you found that allow you to conduct supervision during the pandemic?
Yeah, I can't say too much about that because from my own experience in Grenada, our experience prior to COVID was very limited. It's a struggle to get investigators to submit a brief annual report, which is what we require of them. We have occasionally asked for more frequently when we had a particular reason to do that. It's very difficult to get them to comply. And so I agree with the suggestions made that we need a higher authority we need an authority, right? The Research Ethics Committee can sort of say, no, you have to shut down, but we can't enforce that. We can't regulate it. All we can do is make that statement to the institution or the body, the appropriate body. So I do agree with the suggestions that Juan and Adriel had made about those strategies.
Thank you, Cheryl. Sandra, do you have anything to add? Sandra, you're on mute. Okay, now I got it. I think that we need to generate strategies. Well, there are means to decentralize the monitoring in some cases. Allow me to explain. In Chile, a scientific ethics committee that approves a given protocol has an obligation to monitor it. However, if there is a research protocol that is approved by a given ethics committee in a given region, a different region from where the protocol is going to be put into practice, that creates logistical challenges which make monitoring or oversight very difficult because that would require resources. A scientific ethics committee in the public system, I don't know. It requires resources to conduct this monitoring. And since there are not enough resources, it's most likely that the monitoring will be inadequate. So it occurs to me just right now that, for example, what we attorneys do when one court calls upon a court of another region to carry out certain transactions in another city, it seems to me that perhaps we could require, of course, it would always be the local ethics committee that can, we want to make sure that the local ethics committee conducts the supervision without prejudice to the fact that a different ethics committee may have approved the study. In Chile, there is no restriction. In other words, it suffices for one ethics committee to approve the study, and then that would be considered valid. Therefore, it could be an ethics committee in a city very far from where the study is going to take place. So I think we need to establish a means, we need to change the rules to make sure that the monitoring is always done on site. That is, that the research ethics committee that's closest to where the study is, or where the protocol is going to be put into practice, that should be the committee that supervises. Also, the role of the health authorities is very important. Perhaps we should be very ambitious and think that the research ethics committees are going to have the capacity to move about and conduct the monitoring the way it should be done. Monitoring, scientific and ethical monitoring is very important. We have to look at the subjects, the participants, to make sure that the protocol is being used the way it was approved and that the informed consent is truly being done as was recommended by the REC. So these are very relative and complicated things. We've already talked about the limited capacity of our regs. Therefore, the health authority needs to assume its proper role in oversight of the implementation of research protocols, obviously in collaboration with the ethics committee, but the health authorities have the resources to do this, and they truly should begin to work in this fashion, I believe. Thank you, Sandra. And this brings us back to what Juan was talking about in terms of the need to make this visible. The health authorities can make it visible. And Cheryl also talked about the responsibility to raise the profile of this work. One point to point out is something that we've seen during the pandemic. We might be able to do collaborative work with more fluid communication, primarily thanks to electronics means, not only amongst members of the ethics committees, but also with the researchers themselves. In other words, the ability to get in touch with them very quickly and ask questions. And this is both true on the local and on the regional level. As you see right here with these webinars, we can have communication amongst different countries very quickly and easily in ways that were not possible in the past. It used to seem too hard to communicate this way. So what are your suggestions for taking this a step further in our collaboration to formalize this? Juan, would you like to get us started? One strategy is that of strengthening these types of communications mechanisms, like this webinar. We also discussed meetings to coordinate all of the sectors involved in the research system, from the ethics committees to the researchers and to communication with the health authorities. So if any of these communities are not discussing, unfortunately one's microphone went off again. If any of them are not discussing the specific aspects of the studies that are being done, then they can coordinate like a coordinating committee. In our experience, we have seen that sometimes if you meet with one or several researchers for just 5 to 10 minutes, you can resolve several issues that might have taken 5 or 10 days otherwise. So this is a good mechanism. And I have the following idea. We can work better if we have better coordination, and that's by improving communication. How do we improve communications? That's by using these various online means that are available. Before the pandemic, we did it all in person, and we would meet in person, but now everything's being done virtually. Well, not everything, but we have made a lot of progress in this regard. So we should take advantage of these kinds, this kind of work. But where there is a challenge for each of us in our different countries is to acknowledge this kind of virtual work as part of our workday. Right now, in some of our countries, well, I'm in Peru, because of the mandatory lockdown, the government has come to acknowledge telework. In other countries, I think they've done things. But what happened during the pandemic, sometimes we have mixed systems or not. But this is important because a lot of us who work on the research ethics committees have activities and obligations within the health system. So that is another thing to bear in mind. Something else I'd like to point out in the use of these virtual means is that with the changes in evidence, as various studies are carried out and then the protocols have to change, you might be approving one, but then the next week you see that what you just approved is outdated, and so you have to review it all again. And this type of communication, resources for this would really help simplify our work. Okay, over. Thank you, Juan. Now, taking advantage of the fact that Adriel and Sandra are both attorneys, what are the possibilities you see to formalize these means of coordination and communication? Adriel? How to formalize this? Well, the first step is to put out a regulation on this, but I think the regulation is maybe the end point. First, you have to discuss this, you have to reach consensus, and it seems to me that an important aspect beyond formalizing this and how you do that, an important thing is to go back to this. I think the key is in this. It's very important to automate these or computerize these systems and to automate the systems in managing all of this data. These kinds of meetings or this form of communication is, of course, of a great value, but that's at the beginning. Through these talks, they tend to be triggers. This is what starts our work. But I think it would be much easier if you could access this in real time, if you had the information on demand. With alert systems, I might sound like a futurist and it may require too many resources, but it would greatly facilitate our work. For example, over this platform that I was telling you about, we developed it and we began to develop in 2018, and it was operational starting in January 2019. And I could tell you all that we have, it sounds like futuristic powers, but it's just, oh, you might think that we were just clairvoyant, but no, we just felt that we had to do this and we've had very good results. In fact, when the committee rejects a study, we find out about this and we activate a procedure with those who issue a decision. So when there are disparate decisions, we can discuss this and we can meet about it. But these types of meetings are the consequence of something that was detected previously. So I think that we should strengthen this relationship and this type of communication between the RECs, the health authorities, and the researchers and local authorities. That's all very important, but it starts with automating the data and the processes. Thank you, Adriel. Sandra, do you have something to add? Well, I fully agree with what my colleague just said. I think that automating things, and really it's the issue of information. It's the information that's available that's extremely relevant for transparency purposes. We could have a computerized platform in our countries for our committees. That would be a game changer. It's really a basic requirement for the operation of the system. So it is very important for us to take advantage of this. And I think that everyone, all of mankind, is aware of how important it is to have this. And also the internet is like a human right. It's a right of humanity. Whoever doesn't have access to the internet is at a tremendous disadvantage. So I think this is all very relevant. And secondly, I think that governments need to strengthen the networking. But as I said at the beginning, it has to be real network. This must be done through an administrative public agreement, a decree. We have to look at the regulations of the various countries, because this network, well, in Chile, we had the experience of creating the ad hoc vaccination committee that I chair, and our experience, for example, of sharing this with the chairs of the research ethics committee. For example, people were reviewing certain protocols. It is the sum total of vast experience and knowledge, and it has a multiplier effect in terms of the benefits. So I think that this learning process should be tapped into, and this adds to my professional training. And I think that we should certify this. We might start out this way, but if you don't have access to the information, sometimes I know about it, sometimes I don't. You have to periodically bring people together, but we need to understand how the committees are functioning. The other very important thing is in terms of we need to have a network at the supranational level, and this has to be for our entire region. That is terribly important, because having a supranational network for the region will also mean that our governments become visible. And this will have an effect within our governments of pointing out the importance of these organizations, and repeat that these are organizations that protect the fundamental rights of human beings, and particularly research subjects. So this is more or less what I was thinking of in terms of a proposal. Thank you very much, Sandra. Cheryl, you have also remarked that in the Caribbean, you have that weakness that we've detected throughout the region, that the committees tend to be isolated, and perhaps they don't get enough support from the authorities as we would like. What suggestions do you have to take a further step towards this collaboration that we've been trying to strengthen during the pandemic between the committees and the researchers, and also with the health authorities?
So it's a really important question, and the suggestions that have been made are great to a point. I think that the bioethics unit at PAHO has been incredibly helpful at things like facilitating these discussions, putting out guidelines, and establishing a presence of visibility for governments and researchers and research ethics committees. So it's done a lot of the work for us, but it's not obviously not enough. It takes a lot more time, a lot more energy, a lot more resources. And so the things that most of you have talked about sort of internal to your cities or your countries are really helpful. And I think Sandra's absolutely right. We need something bigger, which is why I thought of PAHO. Having said that, I also want to voice some concern, because what we see in the English-speaking Caribbean is a lot of people would like more resources, more information, more contact and guidance. At least they say they would. But if it were put out there in some format, doesn't mean that they will take advantage of it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can put loads of information out there for people, and we can create loads of platforms and means for sharing it, but somehow we have to motivate the other end, the uptake of it. And on some level, that comes back to trying to engage and educate the stakeholders in the entire process who are not the researchers and the Research Ethics Committee members. Although the researchers and Research Ethics Committee members certainly do need to have access to these things. I can tell you that in the English-speaking region and in my own committee, a lot of things are shared around, but there's no time or motivation to look at them. So, for example, the announcements of these meetings, of these discussions from PAHO and the various guidelines that have come out of PAHO's bioethics group have been shared with our IRB. And I think it's highly unlikely that our members have taken much advantage. I know that some of them have intermittently, but so even though we all want more information and support and contact, the presses of time and other commitments challenge that. And we need to be cognizant of that as we develop strategies going forward. There was one other thing I was going to comment on about this. Yeah, the idea that the platform that Adriel mentioned, that it sounds amazing, and yet at the same time, and the idea of the supranational network, at the same time, there are a lot of countries, including Grenada and others in the Spanish and English-speaking region, that just don't have the resources to even do that. So while the populations may have access to the internet, the governments don't necessarily have much of a presence online. So for them to divert resources from that, or from healthcare specifically, or other important areas, to research ethics doesn't necessarily make sense that that's the way to prioritize things. And I just think we need to be cognizant, take in the context of whatever strategies emerge to go forward with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. I agree that it is also very important to motivate people to have access to the internet. We are bombarded with information at all times, but we have heard about the things that came out all right, but those that didn't work as well too. So as a final question, we would ask, what things would you do differently if you could start again? Who would like to start? Oh, okay, Sandra. Sandra, what would we do differently? Let's see. First of all, perhaps right from the outset, to assume that our research ethics committees were going to be working in a way in which they were used to working, but maybe we should have sort of evaluated this on a more timely fashion, which leads me to then reflect on the fact that we always should be prepared for emergency situations, not only a pandemic, but natural disasters. Our world is seeing more uh, things given um, climate change, etc. So states, countries should have their standards, their regulatory frameworks. They should know how to act when we have contingencies, uh, when something comes and then decides to stay, then we need to be prepared. So, of course, we need to think that we will be acting differently than we were acting before, and we need to be prepared and adapt quickly to the new situation, to the emergency, etc. And in my country, I would have wanted to have a committee on vaccines way before that. Perhaps we should have had a research ethics committee at national level that was there to stay, to exist, not only for emergencies or a pandemic, that we would have had a national level research ethic committee for whatever situation may have come, and to be more alert and aware of public health situations. If I could go back in time, that's what I would have done. Yes, we would have promoted and probably set up an ethics, a research ethics committee. Uh, and this becomes even more important. So we need to be prepared for the next pandemic or whatever comes. Yes, Sandra, I think you could still advocate for having that or keeping something like that for the future. Adriel, perhaps you have something to add. Well, it's simply I have been quite surprised about the way in which the committees have worked. We have created special committees, ad hoc meetings, and we had to look for experts. And these committees were able to adapt and work and adapt to the extra burden of work. Also, committees that didn't have too much experience, that didn't have very many protocols, have had to go out and do full clinical trials, and these committees have become professionalized, and despite the challenges. One thing, what Sandra was talking about, having a birth certificate, uh, this would be important. However, not all the committees have created special procedures for a pandemic. And yes, some new rules have been generated and formulated, but they are not in writing yet. So I think it would be a good idea to institutionalize or document all these things, all these alternative and new processes that have been created for the pandemic, so that we have all of this written down for future situations. We also need to have all these criteria to avoid repetition. Sometimes there were similar studies answering the same question and being carried out in the same institution. So avoiding all these duplications would be another important thing. So before approving many trials, we need to be aware of this. But I think this is part of the lessons learned, and I hope we can continue to learn from these things into the future. Thank you, Adriel. Juan, Cheryl, would you like to add something? What would you do differently if you could um, go back in time?
So if I could go back, I think I'd like to go back to the beginning of this discussion where it was emphasized some of the strengths of the region and this emphasis on solidarity and cooperation and communication. For me, we need more of that around the world. We need it in our own countries and institutions. I look at the IRB, our IRB here in Grenada, our Research Ethics Committee, and among those of us who are really dedicated and do the lion's share of the work, I think there is an unspoken solidarity amongst us and our other members. I'm not so sure that it's there. And I think that one of the things talked about in some of these discussions, or one of these discussions, was this idea of sharing the workload and the burden and the expertise with sometimes it's called research equivalency, having research ethics committees that maybe represent different countries, or allowing one country to represent, to, excuse me, to review for another, or to do some of them jointly. I think that would, particularly because we have so few resources, and particularly because in the time of a pandemic or public health emergency of any sort, we need to act quickly. We need to work together and share resources. So that's what I would like. And I know there are many, many challenges to that happening. And part of it is the I would say limited communication and limited trust, that you can't build the trust without having the communication and the time and the experience. And so this is why networks can be so important, particularly supranational. And so I guess if I had in an ideal world and could go back and do it again, I would look for ways to really build that sense of solidarity and communication internal to our IRB here, but also with other English-speaking IRBs or research ethics committees as a start, and then certainly across languages.
Thank you, Cheryl. Now, Juan, do you have a last comment? Well, first of all, the pandemic has shown us things that we needed to implement. Now, we have learned that there are many things that we need to implement. There are things that we've done. We have developed strategies, and we have the situation of having centralized research, for example, population centered, but having the possibility to recruit different kinds of researchers with different foci, and therefore be able to have research ethic committees that have different levels of expertise. It's different to evaluate and review a locally based protocol than to review a totally different protocol, which is bigger, etc. So different kinds of expertise are needed, of course. And there are different levels of knowledge and expertise necessary. Also, we need plans of contingency to ensure resources. It may be also a good idea to have those resources figured out. And I go back to my very first comment here. We need to make our research ethics committees to become visible. And we need to have those networks that help in our being visible, not only nationally, but also supranationally. And maybe having a supranational network could identify those who are, say, to do some research in Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia regarding plasma studies. And maybe we could collaborate and we could set up a multi-center study at international level to, of course, this demands a large effort of coordination. But I think this is something that could be considered as an important factor. Another aspect, or something else we have learned, is validation of new processes. We we have to evaluate all these processes, and they have to be validated in under new conditions. And uh, we will learn to validate them in situations outside a crisis, outside the pandemic. Also, we have learned many experiences during the crisis. And as someone has already said, we need to record this, the, either the central strategies, the decentralized strategies, whatever the experience that has been gained needs to be recorded. And we need to collect all the documents, and then our work will be enriched. And the different committees in the different countries have developed their own rules and regulations for their work, and all of this should be documented and recorded and shared, because this may help in the future. The last point I want to make is that coordination, articulation, information are essential for situations like the ones we have been facing. And yes, as was mentioned, solidarity, working as a team, and protecting human rights. Thank you very much, Juan, and thank you all. This has been excellent. Your suggestions, your input have been essential, and we will continue to work. And hopefully, we will have a network. This is what we're clamoring for. So now I will give the floor to Sarah to hear some of the questions from our participants. Yes, hello, good afternoon, and thank you all for your participation. There are many questions. I think some of them have been answered by the presenters during their different statements. We have a little time left, but to continue with the topic of a network, which has been mentioned by several of you more than once, and also the participants have many questions related to a network. So I just wanted to ask you something in particular. How do you visualize this cooperation as a network at regional level? So what which should be the goals of the network? And Dr. Juan was mentioning that maybe it could be a center for cooperation for regional efforts, but it could also be a repository of documents of prior research that could be useful for all the countries. Do you see this as this, or maybe more? How could this network work? Uh, how would this network make the work of researchers and research ethics committees easier? Sandra, please. Well, I think this network should generate standards for research ethics. standardized, homogeneous standards, because there are many aspects, regardless of local realities, that may be very specific. Yes, and there's a certain local level, but there are other things that are general, that are essential, the foundation for protection of the rights of the participants in research studies. Even within a country, of course, there are differences regionally in different regions of a country regarding the standards. So I think it is critical that in order to adequately protect the participants, we should minimize inequalities in review. So there may be some committees that are more lax or less demanding regarding respect for basic rights. When we talk about human rights, deep down, we're talking about situations that set a minimum, all of that all states or countries should guarantee, and the international community should guarantee for those participating in scientific research. So this would be an agency, this network would be a place where standardization would be generated, certain minimum standards. In Europe, there are agencies that generate recommendations for that region. In our case, of countries that have history in common and many things in common, it would be very important for us to be able to standardize our regulations and establish those minimum standards. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Is there any other comment about what specific mechanisms or specific objectives should this network have to work at regional level? Adriel? Well, yes, dovetailing on what Sandra said, I think minimum standard of research ethics, we already have them, and this is something that PAHO helps us do. But I think the participation of these of our committees in a network would be more the articulation. Yes, the standards are there, and yes, we need to make sure that they're there. But participation of committees in generating consensus, or maybe they will never have teeth as a law, but if we use the network as a way to disseminate the information, then we will have those standards gradually become part of that awareness. Thank you for your information. I think we don't have any more time left for other questions, but you are all invited, both the panelists and the participants, to send us emails with your suggestions. How do we visualize the network of research ethics committees so that we can better work in a coordinated manner at regional level? And now, Carla, over to you for some final remarks. Thank you very much, colleagues. I have been taking notes of all your suggestions, but I would like to insist also to please send the to our specific email address what suggestions you have. One of the things we've seen within the context of the pandemic is that many general guidelines or big recommendations that we had at first, or let me put it this way, they were still very generalized in order to be able to implement them. If we say, for example, guideline number 20 about review of ethical issues in emergencies, it doesn't say much. It's very general. So these are the gaps that we're trying to fill with our bioethics regional program and also with the work of PAHO through our ethics group. Many times we knew the direction we need to take. We know what needs to be done, but we don't know the how. I think you have put on the table a major issue, which is how do we work as a network? We need to coordinate uh, the work of researchers. Juan was emphasizing that very much, and I think we need to fine tune, and we need to um, we need to realize that there are several options on the menu and we still have not found the best one. And maybe what we need to do is maybe a lasagna style situation where we have different layers, where we have a network at one level, which is superimposed uh, with another layer of network. And maybe these different networks will take care of all the needs that we have. uh, Finally, I would like to say that from our regional bioethics program of PAHO, our priority in matters of ethics, of research ethics, is to strengthen the member states of our region in the establishment and consolidation of national uh, research ethics issues. We wanted to emphasize this. Some of you will remember this was the first thing we said when we started our dialogues, and somehow this has been the leading thread for our discussions. We have brought in members of committees, health authorities. We have tried to have researchers, etc. We have had different points of view, because if we have clarity in something, is that to make sure that research be ethical, it's not enough to work with researchers alone. It's not enough to have a fantastic law or to have a national agency that has oversight over everything. No, we need every single one of those pieces coming together. So in that sense, I have shared during the question and answer on the chat that at regional level, our most recent reflection on these issues is the bioethics document from 2017, prepared by the member states. We there have reflected on all of these things, and all the prior panelists, these panelists, and the participants all agree that we have made progress, but we still have some gaps, and we still have an issue of sustainability. There is some level of fragility in some of our issues regarding research ethics to be able to implement this systems approach for research ethics. In the second half of 2018, we developed a series of indicators and specific goals. What were the key things that all countries who have a national system for research ethics should have? So for each one of these core goals, we identified an indicator, and we started from goals because our region is very diverse. Um, Grenada is a country and Brazil is another country, of course, and they're so different, but we wanted to provide you with a tool that is sufficiently flexible to take into consideration this degree of diversity. And so how can we meet the goals that can work both in Brazil and Grenada? And also to uh, take stock of where we are right now, not where we were 20 years ago, and we are not where we were 10 years ago either. we at PAHO work with national authorities as advocates. We have a formal document from our national authorities, a document that implies commitment by the member states of PAHO. And having that, we can then this gives teeth to our work, and then we can prepare a chart and or a set of indicators that allows us to tell countries where they are. So then the work that starts with advocacy, and then to be able to uh, win the final battle. And the indicators in English have been published in The Lancet. And this is the effort we have been doing, and in the effort to develop strategies and ethics and research ethics policies. And all this work, in this process, we continue to insist that all stakeholders are participate, because it's not something that becomes a ministry resolution and that's the end of it, and everybody learns just when this is published. No, we need to involve all the stakeholders, those who fund the journals that publish the research. Everyone needs to be involved, all stakeholders, and we are always alert to your request, to your input. That's our work as PAHO. And once again, thank you all for your ideas. And please, please, any suggestions that you may have, any experience that you have, any gaps that we don't have. Maybe there's another strategy that we have not taken into consideration. Please let us know. We are here to help our region to be as act as catalysts of the work you do. And again, I would like to invite you to become members of the list. And I would like to thank Sandra, Cheryl, Juan, Adriel, Anna, and Sara. Thank you, and thank you to the support team, as well as to the interpreters. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and we will send you the recording through the listserv. Thank you very much.